Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out today to Contemporary Issues class. We're going to talk about cults today. Should be quite a good discussion. We want to hear your stories too.
Absolutely.
Yes, we're going to have time for discussion. Ron and I have been thinking about this because there has been more talk lately about, especially in the political arena, about cult-like behavior. There's one, each side thinks the other one is a cult that discourages opposing viewpoints, and so we thought it'd be a good time to talk about that. But our usual announcements before we begin. Zoomers, welcome, and please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen so keep the background noise down. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube. And reminder that we are going to talk a little about politics today, as well as religious and other types of cults. So please be kind in your comments about politics on both sides. We have folks here who support either side or both sides, and please keep that in mind as we talk about that. Right, we can be an equal offender of all sides, but we try to be considerate of both sides. Other reminders, things today, Gay Men's Chorus is going on today, and Highlands Ranch Concert Band, and what else is going on?
Rock Canyon Tuesday night at 7.
Rock Canyon High School, 5 choirs on Tuesday night, which is a big event, fills up the sanctuary with beautiful Christmas music.
Next weekend.
You'll be here.
Yes, the St. Andrew concert,
And the orchestra, what do we call that?
Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 today, Saturday and Sunday.
It's called Melody and Verse
Yeah.
Christmas Concert.
At 3:30?
Yes.
On both days, Saturday and Sunday.
Right.
Does anybody need this?
And Ron will be playing the trombone in that, and Vicky will be doing sign language interpreting. Yes, it's talent.
Hey, why don't you do today? Yeah, do that today.
She said interpret for us today.
Oh, no.
During our class.
I'm not a good political. Did anybody leave their gift at the party the other night? This was, I knew that Mason had gotten it first and then it got stolen from him. So not anybody from here.
I guess it's yours then.
It's amazing.
Yeah, going once, going twice, mine, no.
Well, about cults, I'm going to share a couple of thoughts on it before we start, and then Ron has several slides to go through and define what is meant as a cult, and then we'll have some discussion. So with that, as you saw in my email, we want to talk about all types, religious, political, business, and other types that you consider a cult. And a lot of, I know there's several stories here, people who have relatives that have been either in a cult, or people who feel like their own religious upbringing was kind of a cult-like pressure to not disagree with religious beliefs. So we want to discuss those kind of things. And the lures also, of course, the lure of being in a cult, as Ron will show, is desire to be accepted by a group and pressure to conform to group think also. And also a cult is, in my research, says that it's often led by a charismatic leader. So that's an important thing, and which rules out our Sunday school class as a cult right now.
There was also a pretty good article in the morning paper about Putin and how he uses certain themes and whatever to try to keep his
Yes.
followers united together and buying the story that they have every right to take the Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's a new book called The Cult of Trump on one side that examines whether the whole MAGA movement qualifies as a cult by current definitions. And on the other side,
Yeah, that's the one.
there, okay, you got it. Yes, and on the other side, people think that the far left in today's political climate, is a cult also because it seems to discourage disagreement on some areas. And we just saw college presidents testifying before Congress this week, and people saying that they are not allowing dissent on their campuses
And the
from.
president resigned.
And the president resigned, did he?
Oh, and
She did, and she did. Yep, and some people say they're afraid to send their kids to college because of the predominant liberal mindset. Is that kind of a cult-like atmosphere also? Good discussion. Okay, I want to, before I turn over to Ron, I want to throw out a couple of categories and things that I want you to think about and comment on when we do. Under religion, would the Unification Church be a cult? We all have heard about that one. Scientology. Would Catholicism qualify as a cult with their charismatic leader? Would Methodism qualify in any way? We don't have a charismatic leader or a as strict set of doctrines as, say, the Catholic Church, but does the progressive theology of Methodism qualify as a cult in any way? Okay, okay.
All saying no.
Okay, under politics, would the Republicans today qualify as a cult? Would the Democrats in any way? And finally, under the social category, would a family qualify as a cult in any way? Manson family was often held up as an extreme example. What about the royal family of Britain? Would that qualify as a cult with not allowing disagreement on the basic style of the family? Joy, go ahead.
Is a cult always bad?
That's a good question too. Yes, we'll talk about that. Would the Jesus movement of the first century be considered a cult? Charismatic leader,
Yeah.
strict set of beliefs outside of the norm at that time and that culture.
Well, there's also the Scottish and the Irish clans and the Native American clans.
Yes, yes. And the KKK, also a race-based thing that would definitely qualify more as a cult and did not allow disagreement and had pressure on their people to conform with the beliefs of that time. And finally, business. Ron will mention Amway as an example possibly of a business cult. But would other cults, would other businesses qualify if they have a strong leader who doesn't want to hear disagreement about business practices? Also, Facebook, Eric mentioned. So just another example of categories that we can talk about.
Are NFL fan clubs called?
NFL fan clubs. Well,
Nacho cheese.
I agree.
yeah,
Not mine.
The Bears.
they're the Bears. Okay. So with that, just keep those in mind. If you want to comment on those in a few minutes, please feel free. And I hope some of you will share your thoughts on if you've had any direct experience with cults also. With that, thank you, Ron.
Okay, let's get going.
Okay.
I love this picture. There's a gentleman who's in a straitjacket. And there's also a Rubik's Cube meant to represent a box where everything is perfectly organized and your thoughts are to stay inside that box, stay in the right color where you're supposed to be. Next slide. Maybe the top books on cults in general are the ones by Steve Hassan. He came out at least 30 years ago with, this is the 30th anniversary edition, Combating Cult Mind Control. He was a former Moonie, okay? But he got out of it. I think he had a Jewish background, but he got into a cult. He got out of it and he became an expert on what is a cult and what brings you into one. And he's written several really good books. One of the more recent books by Steve Hassan, Freedom of Mind, helping loved ones leave and Here he expands on the word cult and broadens it, helping loved ones leave controlling people, cults and beliefs. So careful that you don't think of cult as just a black or white, you know, like if you're not a cult, everything's okay. And if you are a cult, everything's bad. There's gray areas, and you can have many organizations that have elements, pieces of attributes that make them cult-like. At what point does it become such that it's an official cult? Well, that's a judgment call, like an umpire in a football game. But I think we can all agree that there are, particularly the controlling behavior aspect can be one of the more dangerous ones. And it can be, there's women and there's men who have been dominated by a partner who's turned into a very controlling spouse. And the guy or the gal may not be a cult, but they are imposing control on their spouse or their friend or their children to such a degree that they're essentially their own little family cult.
Family cult.
Yeah. And Hassan, in his more recent book, emphasizes that, and particularly trying to help people not only get out of official religious cults, but also cults of family and friends, even, or organizations that end up controlling people. A book we'll mention in today's slides, Raymond Franz was on the controlling board of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a pretty small group that's the supreme decision-making part of that organization. When he was a member, there were 9 so that they could get a decisive vote. But he gives some examples where they had issues come up before the Jehovah's Witness board, and there would be like a 5-4 vote on the board, not a decisive decision one way or the other, but so, okay, it went 5-4. Therefore, we're going to impose this majority decision on our people, and pushed it down through the organization when he said, hey, wait a second, there's not even anything close to unanimity among the guiding board. But he in particular talks about the word control. And I've got, if you turn to the page, I've got with the bookmark here, I'll pass this around. There's a quote he makes on control. So I'll pass that around. Just open to the bookmark and look at the yellow mark part. Okay, let's get going here. A book to combat cults and promote critical thinking, I think one of the better ones. And this is readable. You don't have to, you can read it in almost one sitting. It's large print. Models for critical thinking, but Albert Rutherford goes through some of the key principles you hopefully incorporate in your life so that you have what I call critical thinking. You don't become a lemming that just goes with that, whatever is told or spoken to you. So that's an excellent resource. And we did a class on critical thinking. Okay, so some definitions of cult. A group, sect, or movement following an unorthodox religious or philosophical system of beliefs, especially one in which members remove and exclude themselves from greater society, including family members not part of the cult, and show extreme devotion to a charismatic leader. So there's an official definition. But like I said, even if you don't meet the official definition, you can be in a family or organization where cult-like attributes are happening, and it can do a great deal of damage to you, whether you're officially in a cult or not. Excellent. Some good resources. The classic book on Jim Jones, who the phrase, don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Almost 1,000 people drank that Kool-Aid down there in Guyana. And of course, they shot a U.S. House of Representative guy as soon as he got off the plane when they landed. But how they managed to get 1,000 people lined up like we take communion to take this poison-stricken stuff is beyond belief, including putting massive numbers of children in the line and having them die. A bestseller, Cassidy Hutchinson, was in the Trump cabinet, and she was an avid disciple of Donald, but she finally had enough. She witnessed some things about a week or two before the January 6th event, and she finally broke and wrote the book
She testified before.
and testified, right? Okay, next one. There's a great book by Michael Shermer. He's written many good books, but the book Believing Brain, How We Construct Beliefs and Reinforce Them. And he particularly in this book, on page 135, says, most social institutions, most notably those in religion, politics, and economics, reward belief
Oh, I'm listening to it right now.
in doctrines of faith and party, punish those who challenge,
Need that.
and discourage uncertainty or skepticism. So there's a tendency in religion, politics, and economics in particular to try to keep people from dissenting and to try to bring everyone into a nice lemming group think line. Next one. I love the philosophy of Richard Feynman, who was a physicist and has written some excellent material. One of his quotes is, first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool, implying you are able to fool yourself because you're a pushover for yourself. Your own warped thinking and lack of mental discipline can send you astray. So I love that quote. Excellent. The discomfort of uncertainty. He said we have to live with uncertainty. A lot of people are more prone to cults or following a group blindly because they don't like uncertainty. I knew a guy, I've mentioned this before, in Oak Ridge, who went into the LDS faith. He jumped from Baptist to LDS. And he said, what I admire about them is, he said, they were able to tell me everything. Where I was pre-existence, where I was going, how all the decisions were going to be made, what branch of heaven I was going to get into, exactly what things I had to follow to get from A to B. And it takes away a lot of the uncertainty. They give you and unfortunately, life has uncertainties in it. And even when we go to a doctor, we don't like uncertainty. We want him to tell us exactly what we've got, when we got it, exactly how to cure it, and how many days it'll be until we're cured. But that's just good luck. It doesn't happen. I think we're mentally healthier. There's nothing wrong with wanting answers and seeking answers, but we're mentally healthier if we learn to accept the uncertainties of life. So, next one.
Are you sure of that?
83% sure.
I couldn't keep it down.
Well, there's no disagreeing here with the speaker.
No disagree.
We're tightly controlling.
All right,
You'll be asked to leave.
but the American Psychology Association, it says, here's what they think is the good aspects of what a good critical thinker should have. Curiosity on many issues, the desire to be informed, a lifelong learner, awareness of situations when critical thinking may be beneficial, confidence in their own reasoning skills, hopefully you develop good reasoning skills, and receptive to learning from people with viewpoints that differ from their own. Next one. Of course, maybe my favorite quote is Judge Judy's when given a bunch of BS. Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. So, and then I like what Einstein said. Education is not learning facts, but training the mind to think. Like that one too. Next one. Okay, Charles Pierce. a 19th century American philosopher, said there were three non-critical thinker types. Now, we want to be critical thinkers, but he said, here's three types that you don't want to be. You don't want to be a stickler. Stickler is a person who clings to their beliefs regardless of any new evidence. And I've got water going off a duck's back there.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people that take a position, take a view, and they're locked in it for life. No amount of evidence can break them away from it. Next one, the followers. The followers base their belief on what an authority figure tells them. Got a picture there of a younger Jimmy Swaggart. And there are people who follow particularly political, religious, or other figures on TV. Dr. Phil said it, it must be true. And I accept it and I follow it, and they don't question. And they let the authority figure do the thinking for them. It's easier to let somebody make the decision for you. And then there's the system builders. And I've got a that's willing to accept only new information that fits within their logical structure. In other words, if they get information that doesn't fit their mold, they throw it away. And I love this Far Side cartoon. It shows two pilots and they've got a mode of thinking. Say, what's a mountain goat doing way up here in a cloud bank? You know, that's a piece of information. And they want it to fit into what they think is the situation. And don't want to realize that, hey, there might be something going on here. Next one. Human gullibility. Too often we cling to beliefs that are based on emotions, gut feelings, or worse, the feelings of others. And it's said that many of our beliefs are rooted in faulty information that could be easily disproved if we were willing to examine it. I love the quote from John Belushi in Animal House. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? And of course, there's the knock, knock, knock. The Three Stooges, which weren't exactly known for their brilliant logic. Okay, next one. This is The Flash, a comic book from 1962. And he's running down the street and he's being converted into a puppet. Said, I've got the strangest feeling I'm being turned into a puppet. And he was in that comic book story. But when a cult takes control, they typically take control of your behavior, your thoughts, your emotions, and control of information that you do or don't get. The term brainwashing, by the way, originated during the Korean War. There were many US soldiers who were taken prisoners and subjected to harsh conditions and mental manipulation, brainwashing, programming by the North Koreans. And a fair number of them succumbed to it. Okay. That's where the term brainwashing comes from.
Stockholm syndrome.
Types of cults, as Steve mentioned, the one we hear about the most usually is religious ones. There are political cults. We could name a number of those. Certainly, some of the far right or left wing political organization. What was the Proud Boys? I think they kind of are a cult. There's other ones. There's also what they call, Hassan mentions this book, therapy or large group awareness training cults, where they get an eminent person that goes around the country renting arenas and bringing in hundreds of people who go to a Dr. Limbo seminar, you know, and next thing you know, you're at the Dr. Limbo seminar and everybody's cheering and yelling, and you're given a pamphlet and you're given this 2-day intensive course on how you can become, you know, the world's most successful businessman and extrovert. And so there's a lot of those going around.
Dale Carnegie, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he's got pretty good stuff, but that's, yeah. And then there's the commercial one. I don't think, probably nobody in here saw it, but I did watch several episodes. Kirsten Dunst did a 1-year season on becoming a god in Central Florida. Did anybody? No, nobody's.
No.
But it was a mini series on. She was in Orlando, Florida, and she's a water instructor. And she gets offered, this business opportunity to sell merchandise in a pyramid kind of organization. And it's called FAM, and it's a mixture of religion and super patriotism and business, all kind of combined. And it's a good series. It only went one season. It failed only because of, they didn't do season 2 because of the COVID that shut it down. Okay, excellent. Again, there are a fair number of therapy, large group awareness training. There's some therapists become cult leaders when they create a dependency for their patient rather than treating them. And I know we went to a church here where there was a therapist who was arrested for leading particularly women into, he was not only helping them with their problems, but he was having them help him with his problems. Okay. And again, we mentioned the large group awareness programs that conduct workshops. Next one. When I was in Oak Ridge in the 70s and early 80s, I met one guy that had a book that came from a Bill Goddard seminar. And he had a notebook about that thick. Went to an all weekend Christian seminar, and there was some pretty good stuff in it, but he later turned out to be having relations with many young gals that he brought into his organization.
Bill Goddard did?
Bill Goddard, yeah.
Okay.
And he also, many that came out of the organization said he was a charismatic leader, but he also exercised great control, isolation of members, severe punishment, and demand for absolute and blind loyalty.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wasn't so aware of it. Again, I mentioned the Kirsten's program, Becoming a God in Central Florida. There's a scene here where she's bought all this merchandise, not Tupperware, but something like that to sell, kind of an Amway. FAM, AM, you can see and Amway, by the way, is centered in Orlando. Yeah. All right, next one. Okay, so cult leader emphasis. There's an emphasis on obedience. And it was when the leader speaks, you fall in line, you agree with it, they don't like the sense. In Liz Cheney's book that just came out this week,
Oh, yeah.
she mentioned that she was asked to join the Freedom Caucus it's a small subset of the Republican Party. And she said one thing she noticed on there was you signed an agreement that said, if 80% of the members of the caucus agree on one position, you will vote with that position, period. You're not, and so she said, you cease then to become a representative of your district. You become a cult voter. You're just gonna do what they tell you. So she said that was a real warning sign. Cults try to create dependency, make you really depend on them, lean on them, and maybe they are holding you together if you're in a time of life crisis or whatever. And a good bit of fear is often introduced. Types of abuse, financial, thought processes, especially cults don't like free thinking, doubt, and examination. Pressure to conform and obey. And a lot of cult-like and even non-official cult religious organizations really like to segregate you from family, community, and anyone not in your tribe. There's a lot of particularly religious cults or even religious organizations that don't want you to put your kids in public schools.
Yes.
They tell you that these public schools are going to just turn your kids into little devils, and they're going to be corrupted and turn into drug addicts, and you better teach them and keep them at home and protect them from this awful, evil world out there.
I went to a Bible church for 15 years. They'll indoctrinate them into evolution and gay rights. Those are the two biggies.
Okay.
Against public schools.
Okay, well, let's get into some examples, and I want to get as much class participation as we can here. One of the ones I'm aware of, and this was not an official cult in Colorado, but one guy said, "Hey, I was at a church and it was really charismatic and, super." He said, the guy got up and said, "We're going to build a new building. We're going to have a building program." But he said, "Enough of this wait for tomorrow baloney. We have got financial representatives in the lobby today, and we want you to go out there and talk to them and get a loan, like $20, $30, $40,000,
Second
do
mortgage.
get a second mortgage. And we want you to arrange to get that money to us by, next Wednesday." And they were darn serious. The financial representatives are out there from the various banks. They're ready to take your application. And we want to be able to announce 10 days from now that we've got the money to start building this new church.
Are they still
That's-
around?
Are they still
I don't know,
You
but
know,
it certainly shows you the kind of
Pressure.
pressure. I saw another case where there was this was back in Ohio on the outskirts of Cincinnati. There's this poor divorcee, and she's a little bit more elderly, and she's got 3 daughters. She's living in a very, very modest farmhouse, sort of, in a rural area. And she's on the edge of poverty. All she's got is a little bit of alimony and maybe some social security. She's as poor as a church mouse. And she went to get, see if somebody in the family died, like maybe her father, and went to the church to see if they would, at least have a service for her father. And they looked at the book and said, "You have not been tithing. And we're not gonna, you go elsewhere."
wow.
And she was a steady member. She went, just about every time, but she was so poor that tithing for her was, just absurd almost. So there was a case I saw personally. I'm gonna mention shepherding. This was a powerful movement that's still around, but it was strong a couple decades ago. But in many Protestant churches, some of the more strict ones, they decided, well, instead of having just a women's group or a men's group, you're going to have a shepherd. And so you came in and reported to your shepherd on whatever it was, Thursday night. And the shepherd went over a checklist with you. "Okay, Gene, how have you been this week? I want to hear a confession of where you've fallen short.
Yes, Father.
I want you to report your, did you pay your tithes and extra offerings this
Yes,
week?
Father.
And have you been tempted? Tell me what your temptations have been, particularly some of the really spicy ones." But no, and this started happening, and it's still happening somewhat in the Denver area today. You report to the shepherd, and the shepherd is going to watch over you. But you can see how many here would feel comfortable in this position? Show up at Steve's house on Friday night, and he's gonna have you go over a list.
Not
In
today, but
business, they call that mentoring.
Yeah.
Your mentor.
mentor.
and that's what John Wesley's early
Yes, that's
groups were somewhat like, what they called them the small groups with the Wesley question and mentoring in the early days of Methodism.
So let's get some stories from here. Have you seen examples of friends, relatives, people who've gotten into sort of cult-like activities that have?
I'm mostly concerned about those that promote violence and like white supremacists.
Okay, white
Gangs.
supremacy, yeah.
Yeah, in those groups. Dangerous.
Like what draws them? The violent groups.
Yeah.
That's what always fascinates me. What draws them? Their background, abuse in home life, controlling home life. Not that I'm approving, I'm not implying that at all, but I do wonder. What draws these people to come together? They don't mind being called a cult or gang, but
Mhm.
that's the extreme.
I think sometimes it's because you, have a need, you're insecure, and it gives you purpose, it gives you a plan, it sets you on a path where, you have instructions to follow, so I don't know, it makes you feel a little more steady. I know myself, when I was going to an AG church years and years ago, and my children were little, I found out many years later that my mother thought that we were in a cult. And reason being is because I went to church on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Tuesday morning. I helped clean the church. Practically every time the doors of the church were open, I was there. But on the reverse side of that, from my point of view, I was a young mom who had a husband who did not go to church with me. And then started going through a divorce. So my church became my support system. And I didn't see it as a cult. And I still don't see it as a cult because I don't think I would have made it through that time had I not had that support system. But when I look back on it now, I think, yes, there was some fear. There was some fear. There was some of the things that name cult. There, like if our family was having a get together and I had a function in church, it was hard for me to decide. I mean, I sometimes would choose my church over my family. And it would make my mother upset, but my mom never said anything to me about it until it was all said and done and the works later. And then she said, oh, I'm just kind of concerned about that. But when I look back on that now, I wouldn't have made it through that time in my life had it not been for the support of that church, so.
The church gave you more support than.
That my family did,
Yeah.
they really, really did. But then I was with my church more than I was with my family. So, how fair is that? So-
Does the moral outcome, good or bad, make a difference? It seems like the critical elements of defining cult is not whether it's for a good purpose or for a bad purpose.
Right.
It's the amount of control, power,
Right.
etc.
Yeah, and for me, it was a very good thing because it kept me in church. It kept me in a better frame of mind than I would have been. I would have floundered on my own, so.
But I'm just saying the term is taken a pejorative or negative. We call it a club, call
Yeah.
it something else, but
Right,
cult, you can rearrange it, put a D in there and it's a club.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Don, as a psychologist, did you see much cult in your patients, your people that you counseled?
Well, I heard a comment over here about gangs. I worked in the public schools in Chicago for 34 years. But I grew up on a farm in Northeast Ohio. And when I was transplanted to the school system and the west side of Chicago, I had a steep learning curve. And there was definitely an element of those elements of cultish stuff in what the gangs were doing. And I would have kids come to me and want to get out, or they had done something horrible to become initiated into the gang. You had to kill somebody to get in. And the pressures that these kids were under was awful. And but for some reason, I was able to earn their trust and they would come to me. And then we would talk about ways that they could adapt in a different way.
Very good. Jim, his hand up first.
Well, I was just thinking that the definition of cult kind of implies that that
that it's bad.
Yeah.
And I think that there's examples in history that of cults that have evolved into something very good, Christianity being the most obvious. Another one that we may not think about is the Sons of Liberty in New England that was very definitely followed all the things of cultism, where they were violent, they were directed by other authorities, and they were doing pretty tough things. And now we are all singing their praises as being the.
I think why we lump it as bad here in America particularly is because freedom, individuality is one of the top values.
True.
And if you're not thinking for yourself, doing what somebody else tells you to think or whatever, that's bad.
And then, but the thing that comes to my mind is that the flag waving and the activism that was in the 1770s. If you would put it in picture form, looks an awful lot what happened on January 6th. A few years ago, because they were waving flags and they were all dressed up and thought that they were doing some pretty great things on those days. And
They were.
it's really tough. It's really tough.
But I would submit, just to follow up with what I was talking about, one person alone can be a cult. If they're wrapped up in their own system of beliefs, blocking any changing ideas from coming into their mind. And like you were saying earlier, it's easy to convince yourself and that you feel certain about what you're doing. The toughest thing to change is somebody's firmly held
That
belief.
sounds more like self-deception than a cult, because I like your second definition, that it's a group or it's a movement. No, I appreciate that second definition.
Erin had her hand up first and then John.
Just a quick comment, membership and belonging. You talk about, those kids that had to do some horrible thing to gain the membership. And and Vicky, like you, to have a place to belong. It was, to me, that's what kind of comes to my mind with cults. Membership, belonging, I don't have anyone, I don't have anything, and this place, this group, this thing will accept me, even if I have to do something horrible. Now I have a family.
You can argue that the Marine Corps and some of the military services,
That's what I was.
I've heard many a person say, my son was kind of disorganized and confused and getting in trouble. And he joined the Marines and they straightened him out.
Whatever that means.
So,
Discipline.
But I have known others that have not gotten straightened out, they got unstraightened out.
got worse. Yeah.
That's what happened.
And the military cannot allow widespread disagreement with its goals and practices, or you would not have an effective military.
Disobedience.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of a justifiable cult. You might say. John,
It's clear in my mind that we're in a cult. St. Andrew is a cult.
okay,
There's no doubt in my mind, it meets the criteria.
how so, John?
But there are levels of cultness. St. Andrew on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 1,
Okay,
but Jim Jones and all that, that's an 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever.
12.
Yeah.
There are sanctions, you'll be sanctioned in St. Andrew if you stray too far from the center.
Give an example.
There are controls.
Give examples.
yeah.
There's so much commonality, so much homogeneity, the
Hiding.
financial.
What would be an example of the sanction?
Do you mean there's pressure to conform to the progressive theology
Absolutely.
and to tithe? Okay,
But if you don't do those things, you're still accepted.
It's still.
I mean, they make that very clear at the beginning of every service.
Yes.
I would disagree with you.
Yeah.
Unless you call followers of Jesus a cult.
But I hear you saying there's a small number of things that are absolutely required.
Like what?
Pastors cannot marry the same sex individuals, or they will be defrocked.
Here?
The Methodist Church, historically, you know, though, that's an example where the United Methodist Church has said, you must do this or you're not part of our.
Joy said, is it always bad? No, it's not always bad, but the magic word over here, indoctrination. We're all indoctrinated, for crying out loud. You can't live in the United States of America and not be indoctrinated
Good
by your
discussion.
family or your church, and there's maybe good indoctrination.
Wish I had the 1 or 2 slides. I want to keep the discussion going.
Okay.
Well, I think John has a point in the sense, we be clear that there are cultures. Unique, a pure cult or some cultist aspects. There are some emotional issues. I think in terms of this group, we have cultivated in the longevity of 14 years or 15 years of being in existence, emotional support to be able to deal with uncertainty. It attracts people. And we support one another because of the dorms and the culture of this particular group. The group that follows us, the AA group, they have sponsors, and you are accountable to the shepherd or to the sponsor, etc. There are norms and values, but I think it's not a pure, what is a pure cult, but there are some aspects of it. And yes, we have at St. Andrews, we have some common norms and creeds, expectations that are normative. And if you're not comfortable, you'll go elsewhere. But there is an element of uncertainty as with change.
Do you walk into worship service pretty often and say, I wonder how this is gonna go? It's gonna go exactly as it's programmed to go. And that's fine. That's fine.
Jim.
I just wanted to point out the fact that Gene, talking very intelligently, used 2 words, cultivated and culture.
Yeah.
These are derivations of what we are.
I think it's about the extremity of it.
Yeah.
It's if it becomes so extreme that it controls you. Where cultures and tribes can have commonalities and values that they have in common, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a cult until it becomes such an extreme behavior controlling situation.
You're talking about variations.
Variations, yeah. And like you said, maybe it's a number 1 on on a scale of 1 to 10.
The
or
culture. There is a
a
culture.
culture rather than a cult.
Culture.
Interesting.
Good observation. Yeah.
Even in a marriage, thinking of our 50th anniversary, there's you certainly try to please
Mhm.
and agree and get along with your partner.
Mhm.
And you give up a certain amount of your individuality and freedom
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
become engaged in a marital or even a friendship. We do things that we don't want to offend our friends,
Mhm.
our relatives, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters. And we rightly do some conforming of our actions to get along and to be part of
Eric used that word, indoctrination. We want to meet others' expectations of us.
Mhm.
And sometimes you're willing even to compromise a little bit on, well, it's not exactly what I want to do, but that's what Ron wants me to do, so I'll move a little toward.
Yeah.
There is, pressure. There's pressure to meet other people's expectations. We're all dressed exactly alike in here. We got pants on, we got shirts on.
That's fine.
We're conforming to, broadly defined norms.
Right.
Expectations.
It's a little chilly in here,
Mason.
so shirtless.
Almost seems to me, and maybe this is just me, but if there is like a living person who everybody worships, that's a bad thing. And I'm not talking, Jesus is one thing, we all have various interpretations of that, but you've got like Jim Jones and, or somebody like the Germans, during the Holocaust, Hitler, or even Trump or whomever, but I remember just back in the 1980s, I lived in North Carolina, and you put up a picture of Jimmy Swaggart. And I remember when he was caught with the prostitutes. And I think he was caught several times.
Yeah.
But.
He repented, and then he got caught again.
Yeah, exactly.
He backslid.
Yeah. We're talking to people, I would ask people, well, what do you think now? Oh, they were like, oh, he made a mistake. He is a God loved fear. It's just like, you can't get it through their heads. It's like this individual is this individual they worship. It gets kind of scary.
There's another story I've got on the slide. This is true. I talked to a fellow I was in a carpool with, and he was in a certain church. And there was a guy that was a felon, had been in prison, and he had this remarkable spiritual experience while he was in prison. And so as soon as he got out of prison, he decided to found a church. And the guy was very charismatic and excited. And he founded this little church. It was over in the Greenwood Village area. And well, they suddenly found that the books of the church weren't balancing.
Financial books.
And they found out he was taking some money on the side beyond his salary. And he acknowledged and admitted it and cried and confessed. And this guy said, well, now we're considering whether we should give him another chance or throw him out. But I was surprised by the ardor that some of the members had. Oh, he was tempted by Satan and he made this little fall, and we need to forgive him and keep things going. But I thought after two big strikes like that, the felony conviction and then the embezzlement, I thought
2 strikes, you're out.
2 strikes, he should have been out.
But where does forgiveness come in?
Yes.
Oh, that I don't find easy.
We've got about 7 minutes left. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to come in here without feeling like they're interrupting. Peter, I see your hand up. Go right ahead.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure.
Wonderful. This has been a most interesting presentation, and I greatly appreciate it. I have 2 things of interest to share. The Jonestown cult has come up, as it should. I was working in Guyana years ago, shortly after the Jonestown cult tragedy occurred, on a water resource project. And I met a young man named Patrick who told me how he had been approached by Guyanese people for the possibility of joining the cult and moving to Jonestown. Blessedly, he did not join and did not move to Jonestown, and he survived. So that really was gripping for me to meet such a person. The second thing I'd like to share briefly is that I studied a cult in Eastern Colorado 40 years ago as a social scientist. And the points that have been raised today were exactly present. A charismatic leader, controlling, it was at the family level, with gullible people who were not, in my view, thinking for themselves. And you'll be interested to know that the central theme was belief in UFOs.
Oh.
Wow.
Now it's sounding like the flat earth.
Flat Earth?
Flat earthers.
Anybody else on Zoom would like to comment? At the moment, okay. Anybody else had experiences or relatives or anybody? Yes. Yes,
My
sir.
husband's mother got involved in that cult, that Worldwide Church of God with Herbert W. Armstrong.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Back in the seventies and eighties, and it was for financial gain, and she got into it because she'd been widowed. And she was lonely, and they targeted her, did all kinds of things, and finally, she actually moved to Pasadena,
Oh, yeah.
where they were centered. And when we were out there, clearing out her apartment, when we brought her back, there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and this lady, I'll never forget it, she said, I'm Esther's good friend, and she has promised me these 2 pieces of jewelry, which were both expensive pieces of jewelry, so I need to take those, and I was so taken aback. Dorsey was there, and Dorsey said, you know, my mother is still living, and my mother will be wearing her own pieces of jewelry, you may leave now, and shut the door. They were very mercenary, they did target lonely people. It was the loneliness and the aloneness, and then just fawning on them. She had a couple that did all kinds of things with her, but she generally paid for it. Things like that.
Okay.
I don't think they're even around anymore. I
No,
think
they dissolved. Garner Ted Armstrong,
The son went to Texas, and
Yeah.
I don't think he made it down there.
Yeah.
And then Herbert W. died, but
Yeah.
it was pretty, it was really.
Yeah. Ambassador College. They were on the radio waves in
Oh,
Cincinnati.
that's right.
When I was a kid.
College, I forgot
Yeah.
about that, yeah.
Okay, very good. John.
Essential oils aside, I'd like to ask Keith, in scouting, do you see any elements of a cult?
Well, of course, I spent 40 years of my life working for one of the greatest cults in the world.
Well, thank you for saying that, because it has a connotation of bad, but
But I would tell you, after I retired, and many of you know this, that I worked until my vision became a problem, I couldn't really do it anymore. I worked with the refugee troop down at Mango House. And a number of folks in the church here, well, Steve was the Afghan Refugee Committee. Mango House is where they found the refugee dental and medical care. But the young man who started that worked for me at Philmont Scout Ranch, Dr. PJ Parman. PJ has a cult down there. And he has a Boy Scout troop and a Girl Scout troop that he sponsors in conjunction with this community center that is his medical clinic with, and you talk about a cult, this is a cult. It's a very positive cult. But I would tell you that the kids that we reached in that Mango House Boy Scout troop, but we generated about 40 kids. I went to summer camp with you for 5 years, and we just had a wonderful time. We did all the cult things. We went to the campfires, we went to all the ceremonies, we went to all the flag raisings and said the grace of the meal and whatever. And we represented probably a dozen different religions. But the alternative for those kids coming into this country, living in our poorest neighborhoods, living in our situation where the environment might have other pressures that we had kids came in, we had kids that came into out ready for campouts, and we discovered that they had a gun. Or we discovered that they had marijuana or whatever. But I'll guarantee you, we were a gang, we were a cult for those kids, but we were a positive gang where we talked about scout with law and love for your fellow man and do a good turn every day and respect the dignity of every person. The other gangs that were out there clamoring for them were the ones that provided them the gun, the drugs, the opportunity to get in trouble. And we have had kids that have been shot. We have had kids that have been in jail.
Sure. Thank you, Keith. Okay, Ron would like to end our discussion on this slide.
How many have heard the Eagles song, Hotel California?
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me of a cult, particularly some of the words in here. I like how it, last thing I remember was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax said tonight, man. We are programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. That song. That's a great one.
Somebody had a comment?
Well, just a quickie here.
Sure.
Our
go
son
ahead.
was with the Moonies.
Oh.
We were in Greeley, Colorado, up in the mountains.
Mhm.
And I think it happened because he broke up with his girlfriend. And they must have had a good recruitment arm, but that filled the vacuum. He escaped from the Moonies. And then he went on to speak to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs about his experience.
Oh, wow.
He got on the circuit, but an example, there was a vacuum, it filled the vacuum, but he escaped, literally escaped from it.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Second, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna mention quickly, my family is a mixture of Protestant and Mormonism. And my similar thing with my uncle, when he was in high school, they moved to Phoenix and he was he was about ready to join a gang, and some Mormon boys found him and befriended him, and he started change his life. So then my grandma joined, but my mom and my grandpa never joined. And then now he became a bishop and was very successful and,
Great.
stayed in Mormonism, but he's passed away. But my sister, my brother is a pastor of a Bible church, and I've been to many, I'm Methodist now, but my sister married and is part of the Mormon church cult, I call it. And now she's, anyway, so one time we got into a discussion and I just told her, I said, well, I don't think we believe in the same Jesus, to put it short. And her husband said, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. They won't, they don't even get into any questioning.
Good. Thank you, Carla.
Yeah.
Okay, last comment by Ann. We have to wrap up.
I just think what we have a conflict here is the word cult is so inclusive of good, bad, and indifferent. And we use the word a little too quickly, and there's, could be maybe some other words, and they popped up, culture, the other movement. We need to be careful on how. we
Yeah,
use
I like the
it.
sub phrase on Stephen's book, helping loved ones leave controlling people, cults and beliefs. So you want to leave controlling people and controlling beliefs.
Yes, we need to be.
All good points. Thank you.
It's so easy to identify bad with cult.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I like the definition I sent in my email to you that said a cult is the church down the street from your own church. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion.
Oh, my.
Bye, Peter. Thanks.
Yeah.